There are two versions of my childhood tapes. Part 1. A story by user like I did. I was born right in the middle of the 90s, 2 years after my brother. All the memories of our childhood were kept on VHS tapes. Tapes that we hadn't watched in almost 2 decades because, well, who still owns a VHS player? My brother Luke would soon turn 30 and I thought it would be a neat present to digitize all our old videos. My mum kept them inside a box in our basement, labeled 1993 to 1999 A tapes. I had no idea what the A meant until I found the others. Our old basement was filled with all sorts of both junk and memorabilia of the past years. Dusty basketballs with no air, our old inflatable pool, sneakers I could still wear if I gave them a decent clean. I got lost in there for hours, looking through all kinds of stuff until I stumbled upon the box that looked just like the first one I found. Except this one was hidden under a pile of old jackets. 1993 to 1999 B tapes. At that point, I obviously had no idea what the difference between them was, and my parents weren't home so I couldn't ask them. They'd gone on a cruise. I'd let myself in with the key I'd kept after moving out. So I brought both of them to my car. It took a week after I could pick up both boxes and a USB stick with all the videos from the shop. I watched the first few, the ones in which I wasn't even born yet, just to check if everything worked fine. Then I put the stick into an envelope with a card, so our family could watch them together after Luke's birthday and after my parents got back. 2 days after the party, my brother called me. He didn't tell me what was going on, but commanded me to come over to his house as soon as possible. I'd never heard my brother sound more disturbed. What the actual fuck, Max? My brother looked even taller than he was. Anger seemed to make him grow. I was a good bit shorter than him, paler, and weaker. My dark hair was curly and chaotic, his was always styled right and had the color of honey. The only similarity we had were our greenish-brownish eyes. I watched that shit with Ellie. You think that's appropriate for a 2-year-old? Can you at least let me inside before you start harassing me? I have no idea what you're talking about. He moved to the side. Their living room was a mess, with toys, clothes, and crumbles everywhere. It had been like that ever since they got Ellie. It made me like my niece even more, bringing a bit of chaos into my brother's sleek life. Are Ellie and Jacob not home? He shook his head. They went to Jacob's parents. He's pretty angry with you, he sighed. Max, be honest. Why did you make those videos? How did you even? Huh? I moved a stuffed elephant from the sofa and sat down. I brought our old VHS tapes to a place and they I told you when I gave it to you. I thought you'd like to see them. Luke frowned. You look like you have no idea what I'm talking about. He got his laptop and sat down next to me. He opened a folder with 2 video files labeled Tapes A and Tapes B. Did you watch them? A few of the first ones. The A ones? I nodded. Without saying anything else, he opened file B. A video started playing. The date at the bottom said November 1994 with the description part time. It started off with a dark screen, I thought at first. But as it turned out it was just night. The quality wasn't great, but you could tell there were trees and you could hear the occasional howl of an owl. There is a similar video in the A1s. It's me, I just learned how to walk and we're in the park, having a picnic. During daytime. So what is this? I asked. Wait. Suddenly there was light. Somebody had lit a torch and shoved it into the ground. You couldn't tell who the person was because they only showed the back and it was still too dark. More torches followed, arranged in a circle. When it was done, someone came with a child that looked a lot like Luke when he was little and placed the baby in the middle of the circle. Even with the light, it still looked strange and blurry. There were voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. What the fuck, I whispered. I was speechless. And sick. Watching these hurt my insides and I can't explain how or why. It felt as if it was too unnatural for us to comprehend, a sort of filter that lay over it, the sounds. I wanted it to stop, but at the same time, I was too curious. Luke looked at me with a concerned look on his face. I'm gonna fast forward to one with you in it. June 1997 birthday. This one was during the daytime in our garden, but things looked slightly different again. Colors were much brighter, almost neon. Two boys appeared in the frame, probably Luke and me. It must have been my third birthday, so Luke was 5. We were dressed in purple striped shirts and pants, but could only see our backs. We were running towards something that looked like a small bouncy castle, one that I don't remember ever having. We disappeared inside of it and the camera zoomed out further and further. And then all you could hear were loud screams, but they didn't sound like they were coming from children. When the two of us came outside again, the camera was still zoomed out, but you could still see that we were laughing and jumping. And there was something red staining our clothes and hands. Blood? I ran to the bathroom and threw up my lunch. When I got back, Luke was waiting for me with a bottle of water. Happened to Ellie as well. Kept throwing up, but also cried a lot. I didn't like the idea that my tiny little niece saw that, and I found it strange that she had such a strong reaction to it as well, how she understood that something was wrong. Because, technically, nothing really bad happened in those tapes. They were just disturbing. Luke, I swear. I have no idea what that was. All I did was grab the boxes with tapes. Do you remember that birthday? He asked. Are you joking? We went back to the living room. Luke had closed the laptop. I remember your third birthday. Some of your kindergarten friends were there. Mum baked a cake. There was no bouncy castle and whatever else the hell that was. My stomach was still turning. I've watched plenty of far more gory stuff in my life. I have no idea why this affected me so much. Mum and Dad come back tomorrow. We need to talk to them, I said in a determined tone. But Luke knew me well and probably heard the fear in my voice. I'd never been scared of my parents before as far as I could remember. But I also know that they'd been slightly particular when we were growing up. My parents had always been kind of eccentric, our house was always full of strange art and they traveled all the time, even then. They never hurt us, if anything they neglected us a little. But I didn't remember anything scary ever happening. I can go alone. Look, Mum and Dad are a bit weird, it's probably some very strange art project of theirs. But either way, I want to know what's up with that, Luke said. No, I'll come too. Maybe they'll be angry that we found them. Max, they kept them in the basement, in an unlocked box. They wanted us to find them, or at least they didn't mind if we did. I wasn't exactly afraid of my parents, but of all the things I couldn't remember. I stayed with Luke that night. Jacob and Ellie were still with Jacob's parents. The next day, we drove to our old childhood home. Luke and I had both stayed in our hometown after moving out. His house was a 20-minute drive from my parents'. I lived a bit further away from both. When we reached the driveway, I saw my parents' car and felt a cold shiver. I wasn't sure how we should do this, what we would say. As it turns out, I didn't have to. Mum opened the door before we even rang the bell. Max, Lukey, how sweet of you to stop by. She came closer to hug us, but Luke gently pushed her away. Where's Dad? The four of us need to talk. Before my mum could answer, he marched to the living room where my dad was reading a book. What the hell are the B tapes? My parents exchanged a glance, they didn't even try to act like they had no idea. Sit down, both of you. And calm down. It's nothing bad, my mum said. My dad sighed and put his book away, then he got up. If anything, they looked annoyed that we'd disturbed their day. Luke and I sat next to each other on the sofa and my parents were standing in front of us. For a moment it felt like we were little boys again, getting in trouble for breaking something. Neither of you ever got hurt. We made them for a possibility, one that you didn't even get, my father said. Can you please talk less cryptic? I chimed in. It was the first thing I'd said. Those aren't real videos of your childhood. Just remakes. For your audition tapes. They were searching for child stars. Luke didn't make the cut and then we tried with you, maximum. But neither of you was chosen, my mother took over. They? Who are they? And chosen for what, a movie? Luke asked. My parents exchanged another glance. Something like that. The filmmakers were looking for extraordinary children with specific instructions on how to show their personalities. The children that were chosen became part of this fantastic kids show, but neither of you were. Now Luke and I exchanged a look. I had all those questions. Why would you do that to children that young? Why did you never tell us about it, and why did those tapes make us sick? But the atmosphere shifted after my parents explained it to us. Mum went to the kitchen and started cooking, Dad was blabbering about their trip. They acted like what he had seen was totally normal. That was the scariest part. How normal they thought those tapes were when they could even make a 2-year-old sick. I felt like I didn't even know my own parents and I felt strangely out of place. Meanwhile, Luke looked like he would explode any second. Finally, he shot me a look and walked outside. I followed and we drove off without saying another word to my parents. At first, neither of us were speaking. I suppose, we both didn't know how to deal with the situation. After a while, Luke parked next to a McDonald's. I thought he was just getting some food, but instead, he turned to me with a serious look. There's something you don't know. When you were sleeping last night, I watched a few more of the tapes. I mean, they made me feel terrible, but I had to know if anything, really bad happened. I swallowed and Luke took a deep breath. Then he shook his head. There was nothing like that. The tapes are messed up, but in different ways. In ways that make you question reality. Okay. Now he was looking straight at me. You know how Mum said neither of us made the cut? To be cast? I nodded. Well, after 1996, there was a third child in the tapes. And the more I think about it, the more I'm starting to remember things. I know it sounds insane, but I'm wondering if we had another sibling that we forgot.
This is the first part of this story. If you want to keep posted on the next part, support this channel by liking and sharing this video, subscribing to this channel, and clicking the notification bell to receive updates from us. And before we forget, also, please share this channel, The Double Dutchman. Thank you and see you in part 2.